Age of Wonders 4 feels like a complex beast, with a lot of decisions that you have to make early on to establish a strong empire, and they all focus around the affinities. Alongside your tome of magic, your societal traits are key here to building a strong, cohesive empire, and that's why in this video I'm going to break them all down, including the extra ones in the Pantheon, to provide you with my tier list for society traits. Here are my rankings and what I consider. And now, after liking the video, let's jump straight in. First up, we have Chosen Uniters. Chosen Uniters' primary effect is that you get an extra 20% income from your vassals. Not too bad. You'll also notice it's one of the positively aligned traits. There are a few like this, but not many, that will give you plus 10 good alignment. Very nice. And the other effect is that your shield units and your polearm units will have plus 1 rank. This is nice because, of course, it carries across the game. Good universal benefits here. The starting bonus is that you'll receive one of those extra units, like a shield unit, and, of course, diplomatic focus that will give you plus 1 Whispering Stone. All in all, Chosen Uniters is, you've got to say, not a terrible trait. It's fairly well balanced. You get a little bit of everything. I generally like it. When it comes to ranking Chosen Uniters, I think that it's pretty decent, likely falling around the B or A tier ranking. I'm going to place it at a high B for the time being, reserving the right to come back and shift it up a little bit higher if I feel the need to do so. It could warrant an A tier. I'm quite on the fence about this one kicking us off at the beginning. The second default order trait is Devotees of Good. Its effect is that cities gain 10 stability, and your empire receives plus 5 Imperium per level of good alignment. You will, of course, also start with a little bit of extra good alignment to put you off on the right foot. And again, we see some love for support units, this time, of course, and polearm units. These two unit types will receive an additional plus 1 rank. Your starting bonus is that you start with an extra support or polearm unit, but of course, unlike last time, we don't get that extra benefit of an additional Whispering Stone. The thing that I like a lot about Devotees of Good is this empire earning ability. Of course, it will rely on you being good, and as you can see, there's effectively 3 tiers: good, very good, and then pure good. All of them will affect your alignment, but more importantly in this case, plus 5 Imperium per level of good. So you can pick up an extra 15 Imperium per turn, and I would note it's one of the few ways to be able to do that. So I have to give Devotees of Good some credit for providing a yield that is difficult to get. If Devotees of Good affected you at a city level with plus 5 Imperium per city, I'd be inclined to rank it much higher than I do. However, its base effect is fairly simple in that it's empire-wide. And for the same reason that I ranked our previous one at a B tier, sure, it gives you a Whispering Stone, but don't forget that most can get that. I think that here, again, we just don't see enough of an impactful ability to rank it anything higher than a middle-of-the-road B tier. However, I do note that Imperium is a somewhat rare resource, and so for that reason, I place it at the B tier level instead of slightly lower down. Next up in all things order, we have Imperialists. Imperialists receive just one effect and a starting bonus. Their effect is that your throne city, your capital, and cities that share a border with it gain 20 stability and 20 gold income. You also receive a starting bonus that your capital or your throne city, I'm not sure why we're referring to them in two different ways, start with plus 1 population. The plus 1 population is nice, but your first population is, let's be real, pretty easy to get. I don't value that very highly. The other thing to note is that there's really only one ability here, and your cities must border your throne city. That is something that you should be doing anyway, probably, especially if you're going for the magic or expansion victory. The stability is nice. You have to wait until you get maybe your tavern to get it, so some credit where credit's due, but 20 gold income just is not enough of a yield to warrant choosing Imperialists over anything else. I'd also note here that some traits have incompatibility issues. So here you can see if I mouse over Imperialists, we're incompatible with Adept settlers. So there are some things that we can't choose with others. I generally won't hold that too strongly in mind because, of course, I don't know what kind of strategy or culture or tomes or anything that you're building, but it's important to note. Overall here, I think you can see that Imperialists doesn't provide an awful lot of yield. In fact, it's it would be fair to say it's quite weak. Gold is relatively easy to come by, extra population not all that hot. When it comes to the ranking, I hate to be harsh on the Imperialists among us, but I find it really difficult to value this very highly. I'm tossing up between C and D. Like usual, I'd love to just smack it on the fence. But unfortunately, in this case, I think I'm going to place Imperialists at a D tier. I just simply don't think it provides anywhere near enough value to warrant choosing it over other options, both in this class and especially across the board. And then we have Bannerlords, our Pantheon tree unlock. Of course, there are 6 in total at the moment, 1 for each of the categories. In this case, we're looking at the Order one, and of course it's called Bannerlords. Bannerlords has 1 effect and 1 bonus. The effect is that the Rally of Lieges occurs twice as often. This is this ability for us to recruit and draft units into our empire to either defend vassals or for ourselves. The rallies are traditionally held every 15 turns, and from that point you can recruit troops with gold. Here, Rally of Lieges occur twice as often, so you'll be able to get access to this event more quickly. I would note, however, you can pay gold to do so. So this effect is powerful, but is it really that strong? I'm not sure. The starting bonus is that you start with the nearest free city revealed and gain 25 allegiance towards them. Now, this is fairly decent if you're playing a really tight map. You want to find them quickly and pick up your allegiance toward them. However, generally in Age of Wonders 4, these free cities will be fairly frequent around the map, and you'll probably start with one pretty close to you. Most empires tend to. I usually don't have trouble picking up a relationship with the one that starts next to me, because like I say, most people start with one roughly close by. The 25 allegiance is nice, but again, this is nothing that a Whispering Stone and maybe a small spend of Imperium can't catch you up on. Bannerlords overall doesn't seem particularly effective to me. If you're doing a specifically focused one on Rally of Lieges, then you might find value here, but otherwise I'm not convinced. Because I didn't have access to their image files, I only had access to the default ones for each group, 3x6. I've chosen to use the societal trait, the feudal, the barbarians, whatever it may be, their culture and place. And in this case, I am putting it down at the D tier. I just don't think that this trait offers enough. It is a Pantheon unlock. I'm not factoring that into my calculations, but it is important to note that you have to do something a little bit extra to get this one, and I really don't think it's worthwhile putting your time into. Again, of course, all of them could give some value in specific builds and playstyles, but here I'm evaluating them more generally. And I think generally speaking, this is unlikely to be the one for you. I'm placing it at a D tier. Now we move into the Chaos Society traits, and we start with Prolific Swarmers. 3 effects that tie in quite well together. Our cities require 10% less food for gaining a new population. That of course stands for the rest of the game, so at the quite sort of high up ends where you've got lots of pops, that can be quite useful as a general discount. Your tier 1 units have +1 rank. Again, this is something that will be impacting you right from the word go. However, in this case, it's unlikely to carry through for the rest of the game. And lastly, non-magic origin units require 20% less of their upkeep. Obviously, this is built towards Prolific Swarmers. Lots of tier 1 units, perhaps token units, cities requiring less population for gaining new pop, and a 20% reduction in upkeep. This is a pretty nice trait. It doesn't necessarily smash anything out of the park. There's nothing here that's wildly overpowered, but it sets you up early on for faster growth and stronger units, and then throughout the rest of the game you have that slightly faster growth and slightly cheaper non-magic units. Again, is it absolutely outstanding? No, but it has some nice synergetic effects. The stronger tier 1 units are nice, the cheaper upkeep is nice, but it's really that growth for me that takes the cake. 10% reduction in the food costs on all of your cities for the rest of the game is very powerful. The faster you grow, the more territories you'll pick up and the more yield you'll collect, right? Collecting 1 extra mine early on can net you 10 gold, which is arguably more significant than some of the other impacts on other abilities in this tree. I'm ranking Prolific Swarmers as an A tier pick for its universally good ability to allow you to grow fast, be strong in the early game, and build a stronger economy. Ritual Cannibals is up next in the Chaos tree. This one, of course, provides us with some negative alignment, some bad alignment, just like the next one on our list. And just like with the good, there are 3 tiers: evil, very evil, and pure evil. Let's take a look at what it actually does, though. Units gain the corpse-eating ability. Here it is, always hits. Destroy target corpses to heal 15 temporary hit points, and it has a cooldown of but 1 turn. This is a fantastic way for units to self-heal. Very good. All of our units gaining the corpse-eating ability is very strong. Minus 10 alignment, as we've discussed, a little bit of evil. And then lastly, we have but one more effect, no starting bonus this time. The nearest city owned gains 3 mana and 3 food per tier of non-magic origin units killed or lost after a successful combat. So I'd note that it's killed or lost, which is useful, of course, for both sides, and we're gaining 3 mana and 3 food per tier of non-magic unit. So, of course, a tier 5 unit, for example, would give us 15/15. It pumps it into the nearest city, and it's a really nice benefit that will be leading into, likely, a fairly warlike game. Of course, you're picking up chaos. Combine that with the ability that when you destroy units, you can self-heal from them, and I think that Ritual Cannibals paints itself to be a very powerful society trait. Great synergies in feeding yield like food and mana into your city, and this very powerful corpse-eating ability, allowing your units to effectively self-heal and gain some extra health off fallen foes. Ritual Cannibals, I think, is a very powerful society trait. While cannibalism may be powerful, I don't think it's S-tier powerful. I'm inclined to place it around the A or B tier rank. Don't fight me on it. No, you're welcome to. I encourage your feedback in the comments below. In this case, I'm going to place it at a low A tier. I think this is a good ability, strong synergies, very powerful for combat, but also feeding back into your cities. And crucially, it feeds food back in, which is going to be great for our empire development and growth as well. I'm ranking it at an A tier. The last of the 3 default chaos traits, we have Ruthless Raiders. Ruthless Raiders gives us 2 effects. We have some negative alignment, and the nearest city owned gains 3 gold and 3 draft per tier of units killed after successful combat. So in many ways you can think about this as a mirror to the previous effect on Ritual Cannibals. However, in that case it was providing mana for spells and food for growth. In this case, we're getting gold for unit upkeep or purchasing buildings, and draft, again, for purchasing, but in this case, just units. We also receive a starting bonus that we get 2 random hero items. Now, of course, they're random. Pretty hard to predict their quality. They are potentially better than some of the things you could pick up from wonders or infestations, but also there's no guaranteeing that. I think that Ruthless Raiders is nowhere near as strong as the other 2 traits that we've just looked at. Gold and draft, while still useful yields, are in my opinion not as useful as things like Imperium or food, potentially even mana. And then we don't really get a lot else, apart from a chance to roll the dice at a couple of hero items. While non-magical empires will certainly find value in having extra draft, and of course the gold into their cities, this trait doesn't really offer a lot beyond that. However, credit where credit's due, a very aggressive military build-up could work very well with this trait, but the lack of general value leaves me unable to really place it particularly high on the tier list. I am tossing up between a B and a C, and I'm going to place this one at a C tier for the fact that it just simply doesn't do enough, and I can't wait a random chance on fluking into a very powerful hero item highly on this list at all. It's just not in my nature. For that reason, I'm placing it at a high C tier. To gain access to Chosen Destroyers, you'll have to navigate through the Pantheon quite far down through the Warlock pathway to get this, Chosen Destroyers. Chosen Destroyers has 3 effects and no starting bonus, and it's very focused. Raising Cities grants a permanent plus 40 gold, 20 mana, and 20 knowledge income. okay? When you raise a city, you get plus 40 gold, plus 20 mana, and plus 20 knowledge permanently. You cannot obtain new cities, and conquered cities can only be raised. So, obviously, potentially, we're leaning into almost a one-city challenge and obviously a very warlike challenge where you're not going to have good diplomatic relations and you're instead going to try and walk around the map burning everything down to stack those permanent increases to gold, mana, and I think the most powerful of all, knowledge. Finally, you suffer a minus 300 relation penalty with all free cities and all empires. This is something that over the course of the game you'd be unlikely to avoid anyway, considering you're running around burning down cities. So it's not necessarily a drawback. If anything, it leans in a lot more into the kind of relations that you'll be building. I think that this one is, like a lot of the other Pantheon ones, very focused and very specific. Obviously, you need to be playing a warlike game to get any benefit out of this at all, otherwise it's going to completely screw you over. It makes it a very difficult one to place on a tier list, as I'm sure you can imagine. It does one thing very well, very, very, very well, but it really isn't useful across the board, right? You wouldn't want to just randomly get assigned to this on, say, a multiplayer lobby or a random game, because you'd be stuck with an inability to really build much of an empire outside of burning the world down. However, I love the flavor, I love the theme, and the benefits are decent, so long as you can raise a few cities. If you've raised, let's say, 4 cities, you're getting an extra 80 knowledge income a turn. And you can pick that up fairly early on. Ranking this one is therefore pretty difficult. I think there's a huge amount of power in it, and its focus is incredible. However, it is not universally good or universally applicable. It's also perhaps not something that you want to pick up for most games. You really have to build a theme around it. I'm going to rank it at a B tier. Though actually ranking it at a B tier is probably giving it too much justice. Really, this one needs 2 rankings. If you're playing a one city mode, one city challenge, or hard out aggressive focus, it's an A tier. If you're not, and you're just generally looking to set up a game and following this tier list for advice, then reasonably I will put it at a C tier, just because of how niche and specific the effect is. Not, again, to take away from its fun. Next, we take a look at the mystical traits. And first and foremost, we have Ancient Wise Ones. Ancient Wise Ones, 1 effect, 1 bonus. The effect is that when a tome is unlocked, a random skill from that tome costs minus 60% knowledge. Yes, you did read that right. Minus 60%. So when I unlock something from one of my tomes of magic, let's say it has 5 unlocks in total, and I finish one of them, there are 4 remaining. One of those remaining 4 will receive a minus 60% benefit. A minus 60% discount. Minus 60% knowledge to research it. This is incredibly strong. Incredibly strong, even though it's random within the tome, and so you might end up maybe not quite researching what you want in the specific order. The power of getting something at minus 60%, you will burst through your tomes. You will burst through your tomes. You also receive a nice starting bonus. 1 random research skill is already unlocked. This is fairly minor. In fact, it's very minor in the grand scheme. The power here comes from this effect, and it is an incredibly good one. Knowledge and research is everything, right? It's your siege equipment that you unlock. It's your units that you unlock. Your race transformations, your combat spells, all of it relies on knowledge. And to receive an ongoing, repeatable, minus 60% discount when a tome is unlocked is very good. However, of course, it's important to note that it will just be 1 skill from within that tome, and you will only unlock a tome per research cycle. So it's not incredibly strong in that you will get it for all of your unlocks, but you will get it for 1, let's say, out of 5. A nice benefit to have, absolutely. When it comes to ranking Ancient Wise Ones, I think that getting 1 out of 5 unlocks at a 60% discount is pretty decent. I'm likely to get it, 10 times throughout the game, perhaps, saving me maybe 30 turns worth of research. It's a powerful effect, undoubtedly. It's not an S tier effect, though. It doesn't quite stretch to that level. I think it's either an A or B tier impact, likely falling somewhere in between. I'm going to rank Ancient Wise Ones at a high B tier / low A tier. You can fight me on this one in the comments, but the place where I'm going to slap it down is right about there. I think that saving me 30 turns of research across the game is a pretty nice benefit, but not arguably as good as some of the things that we're about to get to. Secondly, in the Astral Affinity slots, we have Gifted Casters. Gifted Casters is all about casting spells. Obviously, go figure. We receive plus 10 combat casting points and also plus 10 world map casting points, ultimately letting us cast spells faster, potentially more of them, in both combat and on the world map. Combat spells themselves cost 20% less mana to cast, again feeding into that ability for us to cast spells quicker, more easily, more readily, and we receive a starting bonus of 1 extra combat spell being unlocked. 1 extra unlock at the start of the game, nice. A lot of those bonuses are not super massive though. And then the other effects, we're looking at 10 additional combat casting points and world map casting points. That is nice, but again, nothing to write home about. You can pick that up through unlocking plenty of tomes. And then the combat spells costing 20% less mana to cast is also a fairly decent pickup. You know, you might save 10, 20 mana, more potentially, on some of your combat spells, while others, of course, particularly at the start of the game, you'll be saving a little bit less. It would be fair to say that I'm not completely overwhelmed by gifting casters. I think it's a reasonable enough pickup, but most of these abilities are simply not strong enough to warrant me choosing it over other things. Ultimately, gifted casters is likely to allow me to cast spells slightly faster, but not by a great deal, and it's going to save me on some mana from my combat spells, in combat obviously. It's likely to save me about the amount of mana of a couple of tile improvements, maybe 1 or 2 buildings, and I don't think that that's really worth writing home about. For me, I'm placing this one at a C tier. Next up, we have Mana Channelers, which is about summoning and units. 2 effects and 1 starting bonus. Our effect number 1 is that summoning spells cost 50% less mana to cast. Summoning spells are some of the more useful spells, particularly in a pinch, if you need to quickly draw in extra units, and a minus 50% reduction cost is far better than any sort of 10 or 20% savings that we may have seen before. This makes summoning units very cheap in Age of Wonders 4, providing you can keep up, of course, with their upkeep. The second effect that you get is that your magic origin units, the units that again have summoned, so we're of course finding some synergies here, receive +1 rank. So you can cast them for half the mana, and they'll have +1 rank. You start with an extra magic origin unit as well, just to kind of feed into that. Again, the starting bonus is nice, nothing huge to write home about. Summoning spells costing 50% less mana is great, an entire game benefit and a significant saving on mana, far more than we've saved in, say, gifting casters. And then the effect is that our magical origin units have +1 rank, again, lasting throughout the game, providing an extra bit of strength experience for our magical units. I think that Mana Channelers is a pretty decent pickup in the category. Being able to halve the cost of mana of your summoned units and have them appear stronger than all of your enemies is a very powerful ability that any Astral Empire will look to take advantage of. I'm ranking this one at an A tier, and I'm slapping it down right near the start. And for the 4th astral trait over on our Pantheon tree, unlocked very early on, in fact it's the easiest one to get, is Mana Addicts under the Wizard Culture trait. Mana Addicts has 2 effects and 1 starting bonus. The effects are pretty spicy. All units gain the attunement Mana Addicted. Whenever a combat spell is cast, which you'll likely be doing most turns, this unit gains lifesteal for a turn. This unit suffers -5 morale at the end of its turn if no combat spell was cast. Basically what that's saying is, if you cast a combat spell this turn, your units gain lifesteal, because all of your units have this attunement, Mana Addicted. You're likely to be casting a combat spell every turn. I'll just say. Sure, there'll be sometimes when you're not, but generally you are. What this is basically giving us is lifesteal on all of our units, basically every turn in combat. Lifesteal, if you're unfamiliar, when the unit attacks, it heals 10 temporary hit points when they're hit. For repeating attacks, an additional 5. This means that your units will not only be dealing damage, but healing themselves, and it will be all of them, every time. Very strong. Battle Mage units and support units also start with +1 rank, so it's not all of our units, but it's a fairly wide-reaching category, 2 categories. And then we have a starting bonus where we'll get an extra one of those, an extra Battle Mage, an extra support. Like usual, the starting bonus is decent. The Battle Mage units and support units receiving extra rank is good. And the fact that all units in combat, after we cast a spell, which we'll easily be able to do even on the first turn of combat if we're heading down this tree, have lifesteal. This Mana Addicts is very, very powerful. Lifesteal will keep your units alive every turn while you fight. I feel a little bit strange right now, for a lot of reasons, but primarily because this is the first one that I'm going to rank at an S tier. We've had some powerful pickups already, don't get me wrong, particularly looking at a couple of those ones around A tier. But I think that having the ability for your units to almost never die with lifesteal, you will get it basically every turn. It makes your armies almost unstoppable. Really, really strong. I can't stress that enough. I'm ranking it at an S tier. Moving on, for the druids among us, it's time to look at nature. First up, we have Adept Settlers. Adept Settlers has 3 effects. We have +1 city cap, which is of course an effect that we can get like many of these through the development tree, though it does become expensive after you've bought it once. Founding cities costs us 25% less Imperium, so we'll save about 50 Imperium a settle, and newly founded cities gain +1 population, so they'll start with an extra territory and extra yield. A starting bonus is that our capital city also starts with an additional +1 pop. This one is just generally kind of nice. If you're ever feeling overwhelmed, if you're unsure about what way you want to play your game or how you want to play it, grabbing Adept Settlers is just sort of universally good enough, I think. The extra city cap, like I say, provides some value not just for cities, but also for heroes as well. It's our hero cap too. Founding cities costing less Imperium is nice enough, but you'll likely only be doing it a few times. So it might as well say gain 200 Imperium this game, or gain 250 Imperium this game. Nice enough, but not huge. And then lastly, gaining the extra population. This is good to get us a good front foot. You can potentially grab really nice tiles like Wonders. But again, like I say, across the board, nothing overwhelmingly powerful here, just nice abilities stacked on top of each other to provide some synergy for Adept Settlers among us. While Adept Settlers doesn't provide any Imperium, all 3 of its effects will help you at least save some, getting a little bit more. That being said, none of them are particularly overpowerful. The extra city cap can be unlocked from the tree pretty early on. It is for that reason that I rank Adept Settlers at a high B tier, but I want to give it an extra accolade here for being so universally applicable. I think that that gives it an extra strength that some of these other ones don't have. Therefore, while ranking it at a B tier for its strength, if I was just looking at universality and making recommendations for new players, I would rank it a little higher, I think. I might even rank it at an A tier. But for the time being, I'm going to leave it there as a universally good but nothing to write home about trait that has some nice synergies around growth and Imperium. Next up, we have Experienced Seafarers, one I feel quite strongly about. This one gives us our fisheries, so those territories that we've grabbed that are out at sea, +2 gold, +2 food, and +2 draft. Fairly small increases across the 3 yields. We'll also receive some changes to our naval units. They cost 25% less resource to recruit and to maintain, so their upkeep is reduced as well. And naval units have +2 rank. At face value, you might think that this is a pretty good pickup, particularly if you're playing a map with islands or oceans. However, I would argue it's not, especially. Naval combat in Age of Wonders 4 is pretty stripped back. The sea is probably the least exciting and least useful place to expand to, not just because it doesn't have a lot in it, but also because the sea tiles are just not very good. You're generally much better off building a farm on land and getting the boosted buildings and the adjacencies and all sorts of synergies than you are getting a default +5 food from a sea tile. It's just not good enough. Neither here, I have to say, is the extra effect. The fisheries getting a bit of extra gold in draft is almost insignificant, and at +2 food, it doesn't really lean into that bounty from the seas thing either. Because the naval combat is so underutilized, the least useful space to explore or expand on the map, the buffs to naval units and their increased rank, even though it's a +2 in this case, just really isn't enough to write home about. I think that Experienced Seafarers does what it says on the tin. It provides you a bit of extra resource, a bit of extra yield from the sea. The trouble is, the sea started off pretty bad in comparison to everything else, and I don't think that this increase is really enough to lift it up to being viable enough to choose this over something else. Expanding to the sea can be reasonable, but if you're doing that overbuilding your farms, your quarries, your foresters, you're not likely to find success, at least not in my experience, as quickly as everyone else. It is for that reason, and subject to change if they roll out some DLC or some game update that really changes the sea, but for me, unfortunately, this is a D tier pick. Fabled Hunters is the final default out of the 3 natured tomes and tiers and traits, and this time it gives us 2 effects and 1 starting bonus. Effect number 1, gain 100% resources from clearing an infestation, ancient wonder, or resource node. So basically, you'll get double the resources out of it. Secondly, ranged units and skirmisher units have +1 rank. That's a common theme that we've seen throughout. You know, we lean into a culture, we lean into what they do, and we give 1 or 2 of their unit types +1 rank, and then you receive a starting bonus of an extra ranged unit. I'm going to be honest, this one, again, is a little bit underwhelming. The +1 rank on a couple of unit types is nice, starting with an extra unit, sure. The main effect that we're getting that separates us from the rest is a +100% bonus from resources, from clearing things around the map. These do provide pretty nice yield, it's got to be said, particularly at the higher end, later in the game. But I just don't think that this is enough. +100% resource, so if I'm getting 60 mana, I'm getting 120 instead. If I find 44 gold, I get 88 instead. Infestations and Ancient Wonders are somewhat rare, so you won't get to use this all the time. Resource Node, nice enough, slightly more common, but again, the yield that you're going to get out of this, I just don't think it's enough to write home about. An extra 50 production every couple of turns, maybe an extra 40 mana every now and again, is just not enough for me to want to pick Fabled Hunters over the vast majority of other things on this list. When it comes to ranking it, I think that the extra strength for, say, our ranged units is likely to be much more powerful than that on our naval units. Clearing the infestations is a nice benefit, but really not all that strong. I'm placing this one at either a very low C tier or again in the D tier. I think in this case I'll place it at a low C tier because the yields that you can generate are fairly decent, but that's really my only motivator. In fact, you know what? Here's me slightly later in the piece deciding that this should actually be revised to a D tier pickup. I just don't think it provides enough value to be warranted or justified as a pickup. Jumping into the Pantheon, you'll see the Ranger culture trait for the naturists among us is Talented Collectors. Talented Collectors is quite an interesting one, very focused like the rest on this list. You receive +5 of the following resources: gold, mana, knowledge, food, production, and draft. So, you know, almost everything. Sorry, Imperium. For each magic material in their domain. We also receive a starting bonus of having 1 of the magic materials nearby, so it guarantees that we'll get 1. I've covered these in a tips video. I'm not going to delve into detail here. They're like very powerful, very special resource nodes that give you extra special, if not magical abilities when you collect them. City-states start with them quite often. You can also find them around the map, potentially on infested tiles. They're pretty good by themselves, providing powerful yield, potentially. And now we receive an additional benefit. Some of these are more useful than others. I would argue that something like +5 knowledge is a lot harder to come by than something like +5 gold, for example. And of course, it's stacked per magic material. We may have 9 if we can collect them all. We may only have 2 or 3, though, at the start or sort of earlier phases of the game. So it's providing me with +15 on my cities for each magic material in their domain. Because it is focused on providing it to cities in their domain, there is of course a need for you to expand out a little bit to grab the tiles that have it. You'll start with 1, maybe you'll find some city-states that have some more. Overall, I think it's a nice benefit, but it's not especially strong. It may provide +10 to each yield. Nice at the start of the game, quickly falling off toward the end. However, I wouldn't anywhere near label it with some of the things that I've already described in this list, like the D-tiered options. It is for that reason that I think that this one deserves a place around the middle of the road, around that B-tier setting. I'm going to place it slightly lower at a C-tier, just because it's not an empire-wide ability. If it was all cities receive even just +5 knowledge, mana and gold per magic material, I would rank it much higher. But because of some of those limitations around ring fencing it and the need to get things inside of your domain first, I'm going to rank it lower down at a high C tier. Now we move on to the Materium Affinity, and we're starting with Great Builders. Great Builders has 2 effects. Quarries, those tile improvements that provide us with sweet production, will now yield an additional +2 gold. And special province improvements that you'll start to unlock as you move through the game cost 50% less production, so you'll be able to build them twice as quickly, providing you can finance their construction. Starting bonus, our capital city starts with a workshop and stone halls unlocked. Important to note, of course, they are relatively early buildings, but you're likely to save a few turns worth of production on your city, maybe 100, 150 gold, and you'll get, of course, their benefit straight away. +10 draft, +10 production, and in this case, fortification, and the ability to build more buildings. I think that as a starting bonus, it's potentially one of the better ones. However, starting bonuses are generally nowhere near as powerful as the ongoing effects, so those are the things that I tend to look at a little closely. And here we get +2 gold on our quarries, and our special provinces require 50% less of one of the yields that goes into them, production. I don't think that this is particularly powerful. Quarries on a city, maybe I'm getting an extra, +4 gold, +6 gold. Special province improvements happen quicker is nice, but until the very late game, potentially not that impactful. Likewise, one city starting with 2 buildings is great to get us off onto a slightly quicker head start than everyone else, but we don't really have any way to keep that up. We quickly fall off, except for a couple of extra gold on a quarry. And it is for that reason that I don't think Great Builders is particularly useful. Sure, you can make some money. Across the Empire, you might be making an extra 40 gold a turn off your quarries, but outside of that, you're not really getting a lot else. And gold is arguably one of the easier resources to keep track of. I'm going to rank this one a little harshly. You're welcome to rank it higher if you wish, i.e. a C tier, but for me this is a D tier pick. Don't be fooled by a slightly glossy starting bonus of effectively having hurried the production on one key building and a little bit of extra gold on quarries. It doesn't stack up, and I'm ranking it, again, somewhat harshly, but I think fairly, a D tier. Next up, we have Runesmiths with 3 effects. Unit enchantment research costs 30% less knowledge to unlock. This is a nice research buff across the board, just of course on unit enchantment spells, but you'll likely be grabbing a few different ones of those throughout the game. 30% is a nice discount. Unit enchantments also cost 30% less upkeep. Nice, we get them cheaper, we research them faster, and our shield units and polearm units have +1 rank. Ranking, again, a nice pickup, definitely, across 2 unit classes. And of course we get that accompanying starting bonus, starting with an extra 1 of those units. So here it's all about cheaper, or more experienced shield units and polearm units, and they'll likely be enchanted a bit quicker and a bit cheaper. This is nice. Again, it's not super nice, but I like it. The faster knowledge will allow us to get to extra spells and extra tomes faster as we move through those cycles. Cheaper unit enhancements, particularly in the form of upkeep, is also quite good. It'll save us quite a bit of mana or gold as we move through, and more powerful shield units and polearm units is a nice to have. I think that Runesmiths is, on balance, a nice to have. I'm a little torn on where to place this one. It has some very strong internal synergies. But outside of those, when I think about how universally it could be used across many different builds, many different games, where I think about the net impact it's having on my empire, its development, and my strength, I'm not entirely sure that cheaper unit enhancements is as good as something like, say, lifesteal and the ability to heal myself every turn. And I'm also not entirely convinced that the yield that I'm gaining is especially strong. However, I don't think this deserves a D tier ranking. I think it likely deserves either a B or C tier. I'm going to place it at a high B tier. No, C tier. Yeah, okay. The third default society trait for us to choose from is Wonder Architects. Again, quite a specific one. Here we have some quite specific abilities playing out. In this case, there are 2. Ancient Wonders do not require population in order to be annexed next to a city, or to a city at all, but of course it will need to be nearby. Basically what that means is you don't need to grab an extra pop and grow to expand a tile. You'll automatically pick up an Ancient Wonder if it's near your city. Cities also gain plus 20% production per annexed Ancient Wonder. You're unlikely to have more than 1 on a city. If you've got 2, go you. Any more than that, I don't know how you managed. But if we factor it in at a one-time benefit of 20% extra production for having an Ancient Wonder in our city, that's a pretty nice benefit. 20% extra production, maybe it's 20 a turn if I'm earning 100. We'll also start with 1 nearby Ancient Wonder and it will be cleared. So we don't need to head in and fight it, it's already been cleared out. We can annex it to our city potentially for free, and then we'll get an extra 20% production. It's a nice focused one in line with the theme and the lore of the game. It doesn't have a lot, of course, beyond production and wonders. Those are your 2 things. All of your eggs are in the wonder basket, and you're hoping to pick up, ideally, 2 of these annex wonders, but at least 1, so that we can move through with 20% extra production for the rest of the game. Starting with a wonder cleared is nice, unless you actually want to fight it and, get experience and stuff from it. But outside of that, of course, we're very focused. We're very focused in with this one. It is for that reason that I can't give it a universally good, wow, this is incredible ranking, and instead it's going to be slightly lower down. The focus on wonders is nice. The focus on production is good, but again, just plus 120%, is that good enough? I'm not fully convinced. For a themed playthrough, absolute yes. In this case, I'm placing it at a C tier. And then our 4th and final one, the artisan culture trait for this category, is called Perfectionist Artisans. And it has, 3 effects. How about that? This one's quite neat. City structures cost 100% more production, right? So they cost twice as much production, but they'll give you +1 stability and +5 gold in addition to their normal effects. So you're going to need twice as much production, and in exchange, every time you build a building, it'll give you +5 extra gold and +1 stability. That is a very interesting trade-off, and unlike many others that we've seen on this list. Units at tier 3 have +1 rank. That's quite interesting as well, because usually we see either 1 type or tier 1 tokens. Now we're looking at that kind of mid-level, that tier 3. And our city cap is reduced by 2. So we start with a city cap of 1, therefore a hero cap of 1. And our starting bonus is that we start with an extra tier 3 unit. Okay, so this one is pretty unusual. They describe it as Perfectionist Artisans. They demand perfection on their artisans, taking their time to build marvels like no other. And that's absolutely what it does, right? It takes us twice as long to build stuff, and by default, our city cap is 1. So we're going to need to upgrade our city cap if we want to get any extra cities. We'll start with the tier 3 units, and our tier 3 units will be better off. The question here then becomes, is it worthwhile to gain 1 stability and 5 gold for every building if it's going to cost us twice as much production to get them? I think that there are some interesting caveats here that need to be unpacked and explored, and I don't have the experience to deliver that. A few things that do come to mind, though, is that we can rush production with gold. We can rush the production of our buildings to get around this. The extra stability is very nice, especially as cities grow out quite big and grab extra territories. The more territories we grab, the worse our stability will be. So getting a little bit extra is great. Getting some extra gold is nice, of course, because we'll be able to rush things faster in future. And while the -2 city cap is pretty significant, we can get it +1 fairly early on. We may be able to change it in other ways. I think this is a really difficult one to judge because of where it sits. It's very specific and very particular. I think that the +100% cost on production is killer, and it will really stunt your early game in particular. You're going to need a lot of money to try and make this work, and thankfully over time, you will start to produce it. You could also look to use your tier 3 unit in combination with your starting armies to roll someone kind of early on, but with just 1 unit, it's unlikely to be enough until you start to get to that mid-game, and that is the theme here. At the start, weak, slow, with 1 strong unit, but as you move through, you're likely to become much stronger still, keeping your number of cities low and leveraging that extra gold. I don't think it's universally good enough to recommend across the board. I also don't think it deserves a very super high ranking. Perfectionist Artisans, I'm afraid I'm placing you, my friends, at a D tier. That specialization and slow early game isn't really made up for by having 1 tier 3 unit to keep around to defend yourself while you slowly build up your buildings. I would, like I say, recommend leaning in hard on that gold and that stability, but again, it's going to require some very specific tuning, and for that reason, it's a C tier. And now we move on to the final 4, the Chaotic 4. Firstly, we have powerful Evokers, which gives our Battle Mage units and support units an additional rank, something we've seen before. Battle Mage units and support units provide +5 combat casting points at the start of combat. This is very good. It's actually the best combat casting points ability that we've seen so far. One of the only ones as well, it's important to note. And then we have a starting bonus. We start with an extra Battle Mage or support unit. So we've got that Battle Mage support unit synergy. We start with 1 extra, they have an additional rank, and they provide +5 combat casting points, so we can get our powerful combat spells off. It's a nice one, it has a lot of synergies. In fact, it's one of the most synergetic that we've seen in terms of just that everything bleeds together very well. It doesn't do anything to write home about, but it's good enough for what it does. The extra strength, the extra power on unit types that we really should be using with this kind of build as well, making it quite universal. I'm ranking it around the B or C tier ranking, and in this case, I'm going to place it slightly higher up at a B. It was just those extra combat casting points that helped to push it over the edge in comparison to a lot of these other ones that, sure, have provided a bit of extra ranking for 1 or 2 unit types, but didn't quite lean into it just as well as this one did. Next up, we have the Scions of Evil, one of the only ones to provide us with a little bit of evil alignment alongside 3 additional effects. Let's take a look at what they do. Cities gain an additional 10 draft, and your Empire gains 5 Imperium per level of evil alignment. This is very much, of course, the opposite to those chosen Unifiers that we looked at from the start, and indeed, it's incompatible with them and, of course, the Devotees of Good. The Empire gains +5 Imperium per level of evil alignment is one of the rare ways to get extra Imperium, particularly out of the start customization phase. Units are recruited with +1 rank when you are at maximum evil alignment. Important to note that maximum evil alignment requires pure evil. You have to be really bad and keep it that way. Is it doable? Yes, but it is the final phase, so you'll only be able to benefit from all units receiving +1 rank. Woof, right? It puts some of the other things that we've looked at to shame if you are purely evil. Outside of that, however, your shock units and your shield units have +1 rank anyway. Wow. And we start with an additional one. There's a lot of stuff going on here. A lot of stuff that by itself isn't necessarily S tier, don't get me wrong, but it is rare. It is rare, for example, to get alignment out of one of these traits, and here we have it. It is rare to get Imperium, extra ways to earn Imperium. Hard to find. The draft, yeah, okay, 10 draft per level of evil on cities. Quite nice, don't get me wrong, but not quite as rare as the Imperium. Collectively, this one is really decent. All of this stuff feeds together really well. Strong synergies, shock units and shield units more powerful, evil alignment and Imperium. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed with this evil trait. Scions of Evil is very powerful, no doubt. Is it strong enough for me to put it at that golden-plated, very rare S tier? I'm not quite convinced. It's just the fact that I need to be pure evil to get all of those rankings, and it can be very easy to fall out of pure evil. Just, of course, one difference between 99 and 100, and it's for that reason that I'm placing it currently at a high A tier. I would note it's a really good trait, don't get me wrong. Anything in this S or A tier, even reaching into some of my B rankings, are things that are good, solid traits, certainly worth picking up. And the penultimate one on our list is Shadow Walkers. Cities and provinces have +2 vision range, so you'll get to see a bit extra of the map. Watch out for sneaky units. Scout units have universal camouflage applied, and outposts start with a watchtower upgrade when they're built, providing you with some extra vision. You'll note that the scout units, their universal camouflage is that this unit cannot be seen on the world map. So it's leaning into that stealth thing, right? We have extra vision, our scouts are completely stealthy, and we get extra watchtowers. We have 2 starting bonuses. The first is that the Wayfinder enchantment is already active and costs no upkeep, an enchantment that very few people would generally choose to use over some of the other things in the game, but nice enough for your scouts. And you'll also start with an extra scout unit, which of course by default have Farsight for the extra vision range. This one is therefore all about getting extra vision range on your cities, your outposts, and having scouts who are hidden and can see more from the start of the game. It's all about vision. And unfortunately, when I compare that to being all about almost any other kind of yield in the game, it's hard to justify. I don't often find myself building watchtowers for very good reason. They are, don't get me wrong, useful. Especially if you find them around the map and you stumble into it and get that extra vision. It is sweet for exploring the world. But as I've seen, players rarely build extra scouts in the first place, and I think that leaning in to a hidden scout build with extra vision is just not quite going to cut it. It is for that reason, and not to offend any shadow walking fans out there, because I do see the value in having more vision over a map, seeing where your enemies are, finding city-states, free cities earlier on, for example, is strong. But extra vision compared to everything we've discussed and a basic enchantment that I get at the start of the game anyway for free, it's just not going to cut it, I'm afraid. For me, it's a D tier pick. And last but not least, right down the bottom right of the Pantheon progression tree, you have Silver-Tongued. Silver-Tongued is a shadow one, but it's more about being devious and deceptive than straight out harvesting souls. Silver-Tongued provides a 50% reduction to pronouncements when you, for example, decide that you want to make a grievance, declare someone a friend, that kind of thing. Will be 50% cheaper. Nice enough, though I note it doesn't mention upkeep, only their cost. Trade deals with free cities cost you minus 100% resources, so trade's about to get a whole lot easier with free cities. Trade with them, though, to be fair, is pretty limited already, generally trading, say, 6 gold for 10 mana or something along those lines. You'll start with an extra scout, just like we did last time, and you'll also start with that diplomatic focus affinity, that +1 Whispering Stone, which again we can unlock fairly early on. Nice, I suppose, to have it from the start, though. Silver-Tongued, overall, provides a whole load of sweet nothing. Yes, the pronouncements being cheaper is nice. If you were looking to pick up a lot of allies as you play through, you will save a bit of cash over time on that one. The trade deals, of course, nice free benefit, and that's kind of it. Starting with an extra scout, nothing to write home about. Diplomatic focus, easily unlocked early on. I'm sorry, Silver-Tongued, I just don't think you quite have what it offers, and what I need. Likely to save you potentially 1,000 gold over the course of a game, but not do too much else. I am placing this one down at a D tier ranking, the lowest tier ranking. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of my tier list. You'll note, fairly bottom heavy, but you'll also note, of course, it's a relative scale. And I think that there are lots of crossover points that could have easily moved up or down one. Adept Settlers, for example, I could place at A tier and be totally fine with that. I could also place it at B tier and generally be pretty okay. Some of the earlier order ones could potentially shift up as well, but by and large, I'm pretty happy. And I reckon that most people will fall plus or minus 1 of where I've ranked these. But of course, I'd love to hear your feedback below. Let me know how much of a dum-dum I am for overlooking your favorite trait and all of those other criticisms. I'm here and I'm ready. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with more Age of Wonders 4 rankings. I know that there are things like the tomes, for example, potentially traits that could justify with being ranked in this way, and I'll see you next time.